everyone, my name is Tris and welcome to my kitchen. Today we're doing our very first recipe video, and as we know around here, we like our recipes, our books, and our crafts very, very old. Today we're making Roman bread. I want to give a little quick shout out to the plant Dawn, and I wish her a happy birthday, and I know she's been looking forward to this video, so I hope she enjoys making the bread, and she's going to have to send me pictures. So first, how do we know what the Romans ate, what kind of bread they ate? How can we possibly figure that out? Well, they left sources. And for this, we're going to be greatly aided in one particular source. Senator Cato the Elder recorded a simple recipe, which states, wash your hands and a bowl thoroughly, pour coarse flour into the bowl, add water gradually, and knead thoroughly. When you've kneaded well, form and bake under an earthenware cover. Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, it really is. So we're going to try to recreate his old recipe, along with some help from this cookbook here. The Classical Cookbook by Andrew Dalby and Sarah Granger. I'll leave the details in the description, but this book goes into a lot of detail about what kind of grains and herbs and spices they would have had in the ancient world. There's also several other sites online where you can look up different sort of nutritional facts, cooking details, just in case any of these grains or breads are not good for you. They didn't just use wheat bread, so if you have a gluten intolerance or allergy, you can find a substitute grain. We're going to stick with wheat today because it's simple, but I've also found that you can use amaranth and farro for this recipe. They take a little longer to cook. You're going to cook them just like about 15 minutes longer in the oven, and they require a little bit less water to mix, but the basic recipe is about the same. What we're going to do today is we're going to start with 4 cups or 5, depending on how big of a loaf you want. I find that 4 is a good size for me to get me through the week. If they get it a little too big, it sometimes starts to go bad. But 4 cups is sufficient, and I usually use about 1 cup of water for the wheat flour. Sometimes you can use up to 2 depending on how absorbent your flour is, but 1 is usually perfectly sufficient. Now, for spices and various seasonings, you could just leave it at that. You could just have a bread made out of flour, but it's kind of boring. So there's 2 kinds of bread that I've made successfully in the past. One is a sort of sweeter bread, and you can do this with honey, cinnamon, cloves, and it smells like Christmas and it tastes amazing. Or today we're going to do something a little bit more savory. So we're going to use thyme and pine nuts to make a much more filling and sort of wholesome bread. This is definitely it. It's my dog. She wants to say hi. She can't come in here because there's food. It's very disappointing. Anyway, we are going to be making a much more savory bread today. So let's rearrange the camera so I can show you how this is going to work, and I'll check back in with you guys soon. So now that we're back, we're going to take our ingredients and we're going to mix them all together. So we're going to take our 4 cups of flour into our bowl. We're going to dump our pine nuts into our bowl. And we're going to dump our thyme into the bowl. Now, I like a good deal of thyme, but if you're not a big fan, you can leave it out. If you just want a lighter bit, that's also good too. The key is that you're going to want to make sure this is sort of evenly distributed. I know that you guys can't smell this, but it smells amazing. The thyme always smells good when it first goes into the dish. Now I want to mix up my dry ingredients first, specifically because once this thing gets wet, it's going to get really, really sticky. Because this bread does not have any leaven in it. As you can tell from our recipe, he didn't say anything about putting in any sort of yeast rising product. So that is going to be a little strange. If you've never had bread most bread that you're going to buy in the grocery store is going to have some sort of leavening in it. But if you've never had this, it's going to be very, very thick. And the bread is it's not going to rise and get fluffy like you're used to. So we're going to add our water in. Not all at once, because it'll be a hot mess. Just a little bit at a time, so we can start to make it a little bit sticky. And as you can see, the bread is starting to bunch up and make this sort of gooey, almost like Play-Doh when it's been left out to dry kind of texture. And I'm thinking that maybe we might need a little bit more than our 1 cup this time. But let us see what we can do. You don't want it to get too wet either, because if it's too wet, then the dough won't hold together and it'll take a really, really long time to dry out. But if you do get it to that point, you can always just go in and add a little bit more flour. Worst case scenario, you divide it up into 2 different loaves, and the more the better. Yeah, I do think we're probably going to need about half a cup more for this particular loaf. It's a little dry. Okay. Okay, now this is about our right consistency here. As you can see, it doesn't look wet. It shouldn't look super moist. You should still see sort of a powdery substance to it, but it's definitely all clumping together at this point, and that's very much what we want to see. So now what we're going to do is we're going to prep our surface. So if you have a cutting board you like to work on, or you want to put down some parchment paper or whatever works for you, I have these beautiful counters and I'm going to use them. So I'm going to just flour my counter directly. The way I was taught growing up, sure, sanitize your counters first. I'm sure for some people that's not your cup of tea. Not required. But we're going to just take our bread, and right now this big crumbly mess is going to get dumped out and mixed in together. So here's where you're going to need to bring in your kneading hands, and you're going to want to start shaping your bread. So what did the bread look like? Well, here we are very, very lucky, because not so lucky for the inhabitants, but there was this big volcanic eruption, Mount Vesuvius. You may have heard of it. And the entire town was buried under layers and layers and layers of ash. So you notice this bread is incredibly crumbly still. And now that I'm out here, I'm starting to see a couple spots where it's not quite as well mixed as I'd like it to be. So you can also add a little water here, which is what I'm going to do. So some of the things that were found in this poor doomed city were bakeries and restaurants and household kitchens and things where food had been laid out. And so we actually have fossilized bread from the city of Pompeii that we can look at and say, hey, that's how the loaves looked. One of the distinctive things about Roman bread, and I'll see if I could put a picture up on the screen there for you guys, is that it had this distinctive dome shape. And that dome, I've discovered, doesn't come naturally from like the rising of the bread. You're going to shape the bread to that particular shape. And there's this little hole in the center that works as almost a vent. So when the bread is in the oven, we're going to want to make sure that that hole is there in the center to make sure that our bread heats properly all the way through. Because again, it's a very, very thick boy. He is going to have quite a bit to work with here. All right, so making a bit of a mess. It is a very messy process, and I like to use my hands directly. You might want to use gloves if that is something that, like, you have texture issues or things like that. But I personally like to use my hands, get a little dirty, hand wash, and it's a nice feeling. So we're not quite ready to shape our bread yet. We just want to make it into a big, giant, gooey ball, which is what we have here. And now we're going to put our bread back into the bowl. And the purpose of this is to let the bread kind of breathe a little bit. Now, you can put it aside overnight, which we're not going to do today, obviously, because we're making a video. Or you can put it aside for 5 minutes. I personally try to keep it to a couple hours. Through the magic of editing, again, you are not going to see that. But that will help this bread to sort of find its footing, so to speak. So you're going to take it and you're going to put it back in our bowl. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we coat it in olive oil. So again, use whatever method works best for you. I'm going to spoon it on. Again, I get a little messy when I cook. So we're going to drizzle this olive oil on the top and just kind of rub it over the surface of your bread. We're messy in this house. Messy kitchen. I have some other old recipes that I like to cook because I'm weird. And when I cook, I like to go a little bit extra. And I'm a big recipe person. So some of the things I've made are like lentil soup from ancient Greece. There's some sauces and things from that book that we're using that are always fun to eat. And there's a lot of olive oil involved. So Mediterranean cooking seems to have not changed much over the years. And that makes a lot of sense because the same crops and ingredients are going to grow successfully in the same regions, regardless of what time period in history we're talking about. So that is definitely something to consider. So we're going to put it in here. We're going to cover it with a cloth, and then we're going to set it aside. And we're back. And my bread looks like this. It's a nice, it's going to tell me it's wet. Like the bread has the olive oil has sort of seeped into the bread, and it's created this nice settled shape. So now we're going to start to shape our actual bread. And here I'm going to use my secret weapon, chopstick. So here we're going to shape our bread into a nice oval splat. So it should naturally have sort of settled that way while you were leaving it covered in the corner. But for now, we're just going to pretend that maybe it didn't settle the way you wanted it to. So you're going to shape it, round it out, and then you're going to press down and flatten it into a nice circular shape. Now we're going to take our chopstick and we're going to shape this like we saw that bread from Pompeii. We're going to press it across. Nice little pie pieces. Now, if you have this happen, which I'm having happen here, that's just a matter of, go in and sort of pat it, shape it back together. It might get some cracks, it happens. But our bread is certainly aesthetically pleasing now. And then we're going to take our chopstick or whatever other thing we're using, and we're going to make our little hole in the center of the bread for it to vent. Now, if you want to, you can get fancy and do any kind of design on here. You could divide this in half and make 2 smaller loaves. You can do a lot of things, basically. There's really no right or wrong. I'm just trying to make mine look as close to the Pompeii bread as possible. But the important thing is that you do need to have some sort of vent in the center. If you want to make that vent out of a cookie cutter or an apple core, I don't care. Whatever works for you. So our pan here, I have cleaned by wiping it down with some olive oil so that we're going to use that instead of something like maybe Pam or something to grease the sheet. The only issue I have here, and maybe other people can have better success with this, is covering the bread. So I have tried everything from an earthenware bowl to using specialized cookware designed as a vent cover for baking. The problem with it is that our modern ovens are very, very different from the fire and coal, like the ovens that ancient Romans would have been using. So when I cook bread that way, it either gets not cooked and takes hours and hours and hours and hours, or in the case of one loaf, it burns very, very, very badly on the bottom. So we are instead going to not cover our bread today because it's the way that we cook now is the oven, the heat is spread out better in the oven than it was in the past. So we don't have to worry about creating like a little dome of heat to cook the bread all around. And what that will inevitably do is lead to a very crispy bottom and a very undercooked top if we try to do that, because ovens, right? So we're going to go pop this in the oven. Now I'm going to cook mine for 45 minutes. If you are using a grain other than wheat, such as amaranth, or if you're using farro or spelt or any of the other sort of ancient grains that you could be using for this product, you're probably going to want to adjust your cooking time, probably longer. But you might want to start checking on it after about 30 minutes. So what you're looking for in your bread is that it should be nice and thoroughly crispy on the outside here. And when you pick it up, you're going to want to hear a hollow thud on the bottom. So I will show you what that sounds like when we come back. All right, and so we are out of the oven, and here is our final loaf of bread. And as promised, I will tell you, here's what we're listening for, sound. Go close to my mic. So it should sound sort of hollow, like a thud, when you go ahead and you tap on it. It is very, very heavy. And as you can see, it didn't really change its shape as much as, say, bread that you would put in with some yeast and it would rise and get bigger. Again, if you made this with 5 or 6 cups of flour, it would be an even bigger piece of bread, but it would pretty much cook the same way, because the size of the bread has no bearing on how long it cooks, and the overall, density of the bread is pretty much going to stay the same. So what I will do now is I'll cut into this guy and show you what it looks like on the inside. So you can see this bread is very, very thick, almost cake-like. Steam just coming right off the top of that. This thing is nice and toasty. I love eating this with just like a little bit of olive oil, or some spread, or just a little bit of like little olives, maybe some greens. And today I went ahead, made myself up a little plate. I'm gonna go have a little snack. It's got some olives and artichokes and figs on it, and we're gonna go have a very Mediterranean little snack. I like olives. But first, let's have a bite. I love this bread. It's like one of my favorite snacks, and I promise you that this will last you a good while. Like, this little piece of bread is going to be very, very filling. You're not going to want to eat like 5 or 6 of these. This loaf looks small, but the most I've ever been able to eat in one sitting is 2 of these little pie pieces, and that was when I was really, really hungry. So this is great. If you want to preserve it for longer, go ahead and wrap it up in, maybe some paper towels, or like a plastic baggie. Put it, in a nice sealed container on your kitchen counter. You can freeze it, and then you can just pop it in the microwave to heat it up a little bit and get it nice and piping hot. Whatever method works best for you. And again, if you want to experiment, you can put in whatever you want. It doesn't have to be pine nuts and thyme like I did. If you're a big, poppy seed person, you throw those in. Obviously, you don't have to stick to things that just the Romans had. So if you wanted to try this with any kind of ingredients that maybe are tasty to you, go right ahead. You can make this with whole wheat flour. You can make it with white flour. You can make it with any ground flour, really. Just again, a reminder to watch your time on the oven if you're using something that is not wheat or white flour, because sometimes they will cook very slowly and sometimes they will cook very fast. You're still listening for that hollow sound that tells you that the bread is thoroughly cooked all the way through. And I hope that you enjoyed this recipe. I hope that it was easy to follow, and I hope that you all enjoy your own Roman bread. Let us know in the comments if you tried it, what you put in it, how it tasted, and send us, show us some photos, and let's see how it goes. Next week, we will be back in Rome to read some Roman literature for another book review, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!